as a queer person, I have a lot of concerns with the current administration. Do you have any advice to protect and take care of myself? So yes and no. I can make sure that we have stuff like in the link tree that other folks can reference. I think that if you are a queer or trans person right now living in the States, you do have a lot of reason to be concerned, particularly if you're trans. There's been a lot of things happening that are very, very scary. I know a lot of queer and trans people who are working on plans to leave the United States. There's actually a whole website. I think I've shared it to my Patreon, but I can make sure that Allie adds it to my link tree. That is a website about how to leave the US for different countries, what kinds of visas they have, and how to do it. It has advice for people who aren't super rich and don't have a ton of money. There are a bunch of different countries you can go to that are queer and trans friendly, and it's a very good resource if you're thinking about possibly leaving the US. If that's something that you don't want to consider or that you don't have the means to consider, I think that this is a time where all of us have to figure out what are the lines that we are unwilling to cross and what are the battles we're willing to fight. I think that for queer and trans people, it is always a tough question of, do I go back into the closet and hide who I am or try to live in a way that is undetectable? Or do I instead stand up and fight for my rights and be aggressively loud me myself, or try to blend in and do respectability politics? I think that there are a lot of tough decisions that we all have to make, and none of the options are good. And so everybody is going to be making the best choices that they can. I don't think that there are wrong choices necessarily right now, other than throwing other queers under the bus. If you're the kind of queer who's going to help them round up the other queers, that's a bad choice. But, if you are someone who has been out as queer and you want to go back in the closet and that is what feels like the best choice for you, I can't tell you that that's a bad choice. If you are someone who was considering transitioning or had only socially transitioned but hadn't done any medical interventions or changed any of your legal documents, and you decide that you want to go back in the closet and present as cis and be read as cis, again, I don't think anybody can judge that choice. I think that some people are better suited to being the voice of the opposition and standing up in the public places and taking the potential hits, and that is not a judgment call. I think there's a misconception a lot of times that the only way to do activism is to be the person out in the streets at the protests, getting arrested, getting pepper sprayed. And I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of ways to, do activism and to support causes that are important to you. I think, right now I'm reading Let This Radicalize You. And one of the big things that they talk about in the early chapters of that book is it's very easy in these sorts of times to fall to a space of kind of misanthropy or malaise or cynicism, or to get trapped in fear. And I think it's important for us when we notice ourselves doing that to instead figure out what's something I can do instead. What is a thing that I can do that creates positive change? Right now I'm working on a project with some other folks to create a group here in the Bay Area for queer community and for queer play party community. And I've also been talking with one of my neighbors in the building that I live in about creating a mutual support group for the building, where if folks have needs, people can volunteer to help take care of them. And if people, feel like they have space and time available to volunteer to help people out, folks can receive that. And I was talking to this neighbor about her mother, who she lives with here, has mobility issues. And on our building, if the elevators go down, is there an actual plan for how to evacuate residents who can't easily take the stairs of their own volition? Do we have evacuation chairs for people, right? Do we have means to take people out of this building if there isn't an elevator available? We have a lot of older people living in this building who have mobility issues, and is that something that folks have considered? Can we help influence the building to do better disaster planning for these kinds of things? Can we just check in on people and make sure that they've said hi to someone and make sure that they're feeling less lonely? If we're getting groceries, can we ask our neighbors if they need any groceries? What are the ways that we can invest in the community that we're a part of? And for me, that's been really helpful in fighting those feelings of like fear that can put me into that kind of like freeze state where you just end up doom scrolling all day. And so I think it's important for all of us, whether you're going to be the person in the street, the person on the bullhorn, or the person at home, figuring out what it is that you can do to, in a concrete way, make things better for yourself and the people around you and the people who are being targeted by this kind of administration. It is important for you to just focus on finding those things. If you don't know what they are yet, there have been several great articles that have come out about how to participate in activism and in building better communities that aren't just going to protests. Reading the book Let This Radicalize You is great. It's a really good resource for like figuring out ways to think about and participate in activism and organizing. And like none of this is new, right? Like people have been fighting these battles for decades and decades. You don't need to start a group yourself. You can just find groups that are doing the kind of work you want to do. I also think that building communities and like getting to know our neighbors and investing in ways of supporting each other that don't rely on, governmental resources that can be taken away is really important. The Black Panthers, one of the big things they did was offer kids education and daycare and offered food to communities. And disrupting the systems that keep people impoverished and hungry and desperate is a really big thing that you can do to help improve things. So can you get people groceries? Can you check in on your neighbors who may not have people to check in on them? Are there ways that you can invest in your community and build those ties that are about supporting each other no matter what's going on? And if you're a queer, I don't just mean take care of your queer community. I think it is important for all of us to have queer community, to have communities where we don't have to explain our pronouns, we don't have to explain what queerness is, we don't have to worry about weird stuff, right? And there are not enough of us for that to be enough. I think it is important for all of us to really work at integrating ourselves into the communities that we're a part of and building those bonds and connections with them, because when people know a queer person, they're way less shitty about queer issues than when they've never met one. When people know a trans person and care about them, they're way less shitty about this. The Montana House of Representatives is a great example of this. They had a terrible transphobic bill coming up through the House, but they have 2 reps who are trans, a trans woman and a trans masculine person, who I think is a trans man, but I'm not positive. And those 2 people got up and talked to the other legislators saying, like, you know me, we've had conversations. This is a bill that would harm me directly. I just want you to think about that. And they flipped a ton of votes. A ton of people you would not have expected to vote against this trans bill did, because they had those relationships with these people. And I think that that is something that our current social media age of like creating greater degrees of insular communities and atomization of communities, I think that we have lost the ability to remain in community with people who we disagree with. I'm not saying you need to be in community with Nazis, right? Like there are lines, but like who are the people who we can work at connecting with, even if they occasionally say and do some things that are shitty, but who may work at changing those things when there is someone like us who they know and they care about, who helps them see these things differently. I think sometimes the most radical thing we can do is find a way to connect with people around us who aren't exactly our people, but where being in community makes all of us stronger. I think community is the way we get through this. So again, I think as a queer person, my advice basically in this administration is figure out like, what are your lines? Is there a line at which you need to flee the country, even if you don't know how you're going to finance it yet, even if it means that you will be broke? Is there a line at which you know that you are going to detransition yourself for the sake of getting through? Like, what are the things that are going to be the lines for you? Because with these situations and with how this has been going, things have gotten very bad very, very quickly. And so if you don't know where those lines are, it's really easy for you to end up way past them and then having to figure things out long after you needed to be taking action. There's no wrong choices. They're all bad choices, right? All the choices we have are bad ones. And so if you are doing what you feel like is right to take care of yourself and the people who are closest to you, I cannot judge that choice, right? And figure out something that you can do to positively make a positive impact and make things better, rather than just focusing on all of the scary things and all the doom and gloom, right? Like, it's good to be informed, and it is so easy to get stuck in that spiral of just focusing on how bad and scary things are and lose track of the fact that we can still do things. Even right now, today, as bad as things are, no matter where it is that you live, you can still do things. You can still connect with people and build community and build systems of support that aren't reliant on a government that is hostile towards you. So that's my advice. It's not perfect advice. I'm sure that there are tons of articles out there that go into things that I missed, that have better advice than I do. You know, we're all of us queers are just trying to figure out what the fuck all this means for us, you know? I am lucky to be in California, which, I mean, Gavin Newsom is now doing podcasts with Nazis, so that's cool. But, you know, there's at least some degree of protections in California that may not be present in other places. I feel like California is disconnected enough from the Washington machine, both by geographic distance and by political leanings, that it would shield us at least for a little bit. It wouldn't be perfect, but I think there's at least some degree of buffering that we get from being here. And I think I'm just hoping that that is enough of a buffer to give me space to figure out if I do need to leave, when that needs to be, or to be able to stay and fight because it's not as dire. I think that if I was still living in Georgia, I would be having very different thoughts and feelings right now. One of my friends who lives in Georgia is looking at moving to Canada as soon as possible. I have friends in Canada who have reached out to me and said, you know, we're 15 minutes north of the border. If you need to get out, just come to our house. You can stay as long as you need to. And like emphasized in multiple messages how serious they were about that. And like, it's just nice to know that I have options if I need them, and I hope I don't. And I think all of us could access more support than we might think we could. I think that it is highly likely that there are going to be more and more networks dedicated to helping queers get out, if that's what needs to happen. And I think websites like the one that I'm going to make sure we get linked in my link tree about how to leave the country, for particularly for trans folks, but it talks about things like if you have disabilities, if you have different kinds of jobs, what the different visas are, right? Things that give us information that is important to us and pertinent so that we can make good choices. I think that's stuff that we need. And I hope we don't need it. I hope it doesn't get that bad. But, you know, I've heard far too many stories from people who, like, were in the process of renewing their passport when the administration changed and they're trans, and the administration took their documents, didn't send them a passport, and won't send the documents back, even if they were trying to get the passport in their assigned at birth gender. So, you know, I think that it is a scary time, and I don't think any of us know exactly how scary it is. I think the extrajudicial extradition, the ways that they have been kidnapping protesters who are green card holders and sending them to different states, different prisons to try to deport them, is real fucking scary. I saw a great skeet on Blue Sky that said essentially, you know, the thing is, if they can extrajudicially extradite any person who's not a citizen, then they can extrajudicially extradite any person who is a citizen. Because all they have to do is say that you're not a citizen, and you don't get a chance to challenge that in court. You're just down in El Salvador. So I think that it is important for all of us to also pay attention and speak up and support and try to fight against these actions that are happening against people who aren't exactly like us, right? So like queers, we need to be fighting super hard for the people like Mahmoud Khalil, who was the Palestinian person at Columbia who was taken by the government and sent to a different state, even though he is a permanent green card holder and married to an American citizen who is 8 months pregnant. If they can do that to someone who is not a citizen, they can do it to any of us, because all they have to do is say you're not a citizen and they can take you. So we need to be fighting for each other, and not just for each other queers, but for all of the people who are being harmed by the impacts of this government. There are a lot of different groups that have put together like little printable cards or cards that you can order that are like, you know, cardstock cards about your rights that you can pass out to people who might be targeted by ICE. So you can have those available and give those out to people. Like, we need to be doing all of these things. How do we support our unhoused neighbors? How do we support the people who ICE might target? How do we support other queers? How do we support disabled people? We need to be supporting all of these targeted groups, and I think not focusing so much on just like ours. Like, support your own, and we, all of us, have huge reasons for solidarity right now that we need to be leaning into. So that was a very long response to what my advice is for queers under this current administration. What a time to be alive. You know, what I would not give to live in precedented times for a little while. Like, it has been unprecedented times since my freshman year of college and the airplanes hit the Twin Towers. Like, it's just been unprecedented times after unprecedented times, and I am fucking tired and would love for it all to stop. Yeah. I mean, I think last thing I will say on this topic is that, like, at this point, there are a lot of very valid arguments that the United States has become a failed state, that there is a coup that has already succeeded, and that the United States is no longer a functional state. And I think in a lot of ways I agree with that, and I think that there are tons of people all over the world who have lived through the fall of a state, through the disintegration of a government, through a coup, who have a lot of really helpful things they can tell us and like help us understand. I was really lucky last weekend, I was at a brunch with friends at a friend's house, and one of the people there is from Lebanon and grew up during the fall of the Lebanese government through like their failure as a nation state, and was able to talk to us about that experience. And it was really helpful to hear in a lot of ways, because I think it is easy for us to think of the fall of a nation state as this thing that like destroys everything, but like people still go out and get drinks and do their laundry while the nation state falls apart, while the coup is happening. And so I think it's one of those things that like we need to remind ourselves that things are both worse and better than we think they are at the same time. And we should be turning to the people who have experienced this before, who understand how to survive these kinds of situations and take care of themselves and those around them when everything around them is falling apart.